Laurie Huston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
And good afternoon. This is News for the Heart. And today I have with me Tom Campbell, who I love having with me every month. It's always a great conversation. We had an amazing conversation last month on Love Month. Yes, we're still at the very end of February, so we're closer to March now. We've had a very interesting time lately here in Toronto, in Canada. We're just about to go and remove the passports starting March 1st, but I just feel like there's this threat still of segregation and I think 2 years ago when all of this started, we were sort of united together. We were working towards, a common threat, which was the virus. And then it became, last year, it became, about the vaccine. Choices, people felt they had no choices. People made choices out of fear. But then they started blaming the people that made choices to not vaccinate. And whether it created a lot of segregation. And then we just have come to a place where it's just time to let go of all this stuff. We need to move in a direction that's evolving and growing up instead of this, what I feel like we're kind of de-evolving. Mm-hmm. Because when we were united, we all sort of felt that love and the kindness. And then it just de-evolved. It's like everybody wanted to blame somebody else, and the brunt of people that they got blamed were the unvaccinated, without going into why and choices and stuff. It's really about, let's now move forward in a place that's positive. I mean, we've all sort of seen the narcissistic things that have sort of been going on. Our prime minister now is a prime example. Last year it was your president, ex-president. But it's just everything. It's just time to change and let go. We've got to reunite and stop blaming everybody for everything. I just think it's time.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is past the time. But you know what happens, Laurie, is that when you live in a culture of fear, as we do, that the popularity of all sorts of fearful stories are going around. Even if they don't fall into the conspiracy theory bunch, but just even the advertisers and things. If you go on your YouTube or not even YouTube, you go onto the net. And you'll find a picture of a banana, and it'll say, "What fruit should you never eat?" Well, people know that almost everybody eats bananas. It's a very popular fruit. Therefore, they get attention by picturing a banana and then saying something that's fear-inducing. That, right. There's something's going to get you if you don't do it right, kind of a thing. So it's just everywhere you look. I mean, just trivial things like that. Our culture is just full of fear now. Yeah. It has been progressively getting more and more fearful over the last, 30 years or so. It's just been going that way. And, there's lots of things adding to that problem. But, it's not all, big stuff like, war and famine and vaccinations and stuff. It's just simple things like, what fruit should you never eat? They're trying to be scary, that there's something you might do that would hurt yourself. You better read this article. Yeah. And then it probably has nothing. I never look at any of those things, so I really don't know what that's about. But, my guess is the picture of the banana isn't because the banana is the awful fruit. It's just that almost everybody eats bananas. So that means a lot of people will think, oh, I ought to look at this because I eat bananas. But anyway, it's just trying to manipulate people with fear.
Right.
So if you think about your culture and you say, well, who would want to manipulate people? And of course, the answer is almost everybody wants to manipulate people. Well, why do we need to manipulate people? Because we want control. We want to control other people. We want to control what they wear, what they eat, how they vote, all sorts of things. That's kind of the mindset we have. And it's part of, particularly, I guess, it's part of Western culture. And it comes with the new tools that we have to communicate. That's part of it. So we have now an internet. That internet allows us to get up close and personal with almost, 2/3 of the people in the world, are all connected over this internet. Well, it's never been so easy to manipulate people and gain control because we have this tool that allows us to do that. Whereas even just 30 years ago, you didn't have 2/3 of the people all on the network. You had a few, but you didn't have that many. And if you go back 50 years, the only thing you had to manipulate people en masse was television. And before that, it was radio. And before that, you couldn't manipulate masses of people. You'd go down to your town square and get up on a soapbox and, and have at it. But that was only maybe a few hundred people that you could manipulate. So it's us moving into the information age. That's kind of the root thing of what's going on. And whenever you move into a new paradigm, there's people who are going to abuse it. And, when we first went into the industrial revolution, the industrial paradigm, well, children 10 years old were forced to work. And, you had a lot, people were taken advantage of. People were expected to work, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. And they were given as payment just enough to keep them alive so they could come back to work. It was that kind of thing. It was extremely abusive. Well, a couple of 100 years later, and most of that's gone away. We don't have that anymore. We basically saw the problems and regulated them away. For the most part, created laws that says, this is not good for our society. This is not good for our culture. We need to fix these things. And we did. Well, now we're starting in the information age. And in the information age, now anybody can have an audience of, 100 million people.
Right.
All you have to do is get onto that internet and say things that are sensational, things that are scary, things that grab people's attention. And if you can do that, you can build up a huge audience very, very quickly. So some of what we're seeing, like why it seemed to be de-evolving, why all this now? And partly it's just we're starting a new age where now we have mass communications all over the planet. And these are the kind of the lawless, Wild West days. I guess that's a U.S. metaphor, but it's kind of the unregulated days where people who want to control other people are using that new technology to do that. And we haven't yet, as a culture or society, made them stop.
Right.
So we're just beginning to see those pictures. We're just beginning to see how a small group of, like 6 or 7 people were we're changing outcomes of elections. We're do all kinds of things on a mass scale. almost just because they could. They were just thrilled with the idea that they had that kind of power, that they could do those things. And of course, they were making a lot of money too, because they could hire that power out. So here we are, in the 2 decades into the 2000s, and we are just beginning to realize how dysfunctional these widespread communications can be. Now we also understand how functional they can be, how great they can be, how much they give us, how much advantages we have with them. But just like the Industrial Revolution came with a lot of advantages, but it came with a lot of disadvantages too, a lot of abuse. So I think over the next 2 or 3 decades, we'll probably get a handle on the abuse that we've seen of letting people use fear to manipulate and control other people. And sometimes it's because they want money. They manipulate other people to get their money, right? Well, we call that a scam, but if it's not illegal, then it's not a scam. It's just clever people, like advertisers, and politicians and others that want money, would like to have your money and your support. So anyway, I think that we will probably see some of the negative things that right now we're suffering with, and we will create some legislation to tame those parts of it. I mean, maybe it'll take us longer. I don't know. But so that's part of why we're here, and why this is different than 50 years ago or 100 years ago. That wasn't the case. Anybody couldn't get 50 million people, excited. Well, now you can. And other people do it not because they expect to get money from it. It's just because they can. Just the power, you want to have the power to make things happen, to affect a lot of people. Well, make up a horrendous story someplace, a scary story that lets everybody know how they are being abused and misused and tricked and eating the wrong food and, whatever it is, make up a story and float it out there and then swear to it. Then, come back as another person on the internet, change your name, come back and say, oh yeah, I agree with that. I saw that too, and then change your name again. And pretty soon you are 10 or 20 people all saying about how you have personal experience with that. And then you start making up stories that are hard to check. You say that it's hard for people to get the facts to know that they're lies. And you start making those up. And pretty soon you'll have, first thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who will go down that rabbit hole with you because they're fearful people in this world of fear we live in. One thing about fear is if you have a fear, it's much easier to have more fear. The more fearful you are, the more ready you are to grab hold of scary things and look at them. The more you feel like you're a victim, you're a little person and everybody's abusing you and taking advantage of you and manipulating you. Well, anybody makes something up that says, oh, you're being abused and you're being manipulated. Oh, you just grab right onto it and you believe it. You don't need to check it out. You just believe it because it resonates with your victimhood. It resonates with you being the little person that's being overrun by the big corporation or the big government or this or that or something else. So we start down that path, and it's one of those things that every step you take down that path makes it easier for you to take the next step, which makes it even easier yet to take the next step. So it's one of those things in electrical engineering, they call that positive feedback, which means whatever you do, the next thing's even easier to do more, which makes it easier to do more. It just keeps reinforcing itself. And that's the way fear is. It reinforces. So here we are in 2022. We have probably the most fearful population that we've ever had, and not just in Western culture, but in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because this fear-mongering now has been going on ever since we had radio, and then it stepped up the game by an order of magnitude when we had TV, and then it stepped up the game by probably 5 orders of magnitude when we got to the internet, because now everybody can play. It used to be you had to be in a big network or something if you were going to play on TV. But no, now everybody can play. So anybody that just wants to have some fun, and get people, psyched up about something, even if it isn't all that negative, like the flat Earth, right? Right. So we have the flat Earth group now, and
Again, yes.
yeah, and what's the point, right? That's so somebody, in my mind, I don't know how that got started, but in my mind, somebody thought that would be funny, to float that out there, and they did it, and then they were surprised to find there were so many people willing to feel victimized by their culture and their scientists and their governments to believe that, and so on. So we had all these victims out there just waiting to grab hold of something to help justify their feeling of victimhood and being small and being abused and being lied to. So trust starts to dissolve with fear. As that trust dissolves, you're open to all kinds of silliness. All sorts of silliness goes around. And why would somebody put that out about a flat Earth? Just because they could, it's fun, they could sit back and snicker over the thousands of people who are all wound up tight around the axle over that issue. And it's just, they feel powerful. So then they do other things. So how do little people who feel very effete, not powerful at all, how do they kind of get to feel more powerful? Well, they float garbage out on the internet to see if they can't get other people excited. It's just where we are. That's what I mean when I say as you go down this step toward fear, it's just easier and easier to do more. It's easier and easier for that to spread. And as people see all of that, they say, oh, look, our government's lying, the scientists are lying, everybody's lying to us. And now they feel like poor little victims that are being lied to and manipulated, and they're looking very suspiciously at everything. Well, there's a name for that. What is it? Paranoid, right? There's a name for that. It's called paranoid, where you think everybody's out to cheat you, everybody's out to get you, everybody's out to take advantage of you. Well, in part, that's supported by fact. There are an awful lot of people out there trying to manipulate you. The people who have power, the people who want power, very quickly understand things like radio, TV, and now the internet as basis of power. And they start using that. And they get very good at it. So it's true. There are a lot of people out there trying to manipulate you. And there's a lot of people out there trying to frighten you, because fear is just like a great big handle that grows out of the middle of your back that anybody can grab hold of and just make you dance or, make you do whatever they want. It's the way you can be manipulated is through your fear. And if you know and understand deeply anybody's fear, you can manipulate them very easily by playing to that fear. So that's not lost on politicians and marketeers and, the legal system and everybody else who'd like to, the religious community. So anybody who wants to manipulate anybody else, anybody that's got an organization that would like to get money or get more members or whatever, they tend to play on fear.
Yeah.
Right? That's the organizing principle. And now we move into the information age, and we're just awash in it. Just awash in it and abuses of it. I'm hopeful that maybe a few decades from now that won't be the case. We're just beginning to see, oh, I think there's a problem here. Facebook just changed the outcome of an election. Well, why? Because they want money. That's why. They get richer. The more people get angry and upset and violent and crazy, the more money they make, because the more engaged those people are and the more they click on things which show ads and so on. So they get paid by how many people see that ad. That's what they charge that person who's paying for that ad. So every time they can get somebody to click on something on a page that has an ad on it, the money comes to them. So that's why, people, that's just greed. And, greed is such that the people that are greedy don't really care what kind of harm they do. Like, that's not their problem. They're just trying to get more and more and more and more. Like, well, we've got 10 billion in the bank, but we need more and more and more. That's greed. And you talked about
narcissism,
yeah. And you see, that's part of narcissism. Narcissism is just the extreme end of self-centeredness. Self-centeredness is what you get when you have fear. If you're fearful, you're self-centered. Fear is always about you. And these people, what are they afraid of? If they've got $1 billion in the bank, what are you afraid of if you have $1 billion in the bank? Well, you're afraid that you won't be able to keep doing that, so you better do it now. You're afraid that that's not enough. If you got 10 billion, maybe you need 20 billion, because more that you have, the more power you have. And if you're afraid, then you want power. You need power. So it's all based on fear. And so that's kind of the overview of why we're here. Like you say, without discussing the details, let's not talk about vax, anti-vax, and all of that. That's just the details of what people get wrapped up around the axle about. That's not really the source. That's a symptom of what we're seeing.
Right.
So its information age has created a platform for people to spread fear and therefore feel powerful, whether they're manipulating people to get their money or just manipulating people to watch the people jump up and down and dance just because they can. Whatever it is, it's a chance for people to feel powerful by manipulating others. And we're rife with it right now.
Yeah.
Until we, as a culture, as the governments, Canadian, U.S., France, Britain, Germany, all the governments, when they get to the point that they start seeing that dysfunction and realizing that it needs to be regulated, you can't just let anybody say anything. There has to be some what's the word? Responsibility. If you put something out there and it causes a whole lot of dysfunction, well, you need to pay. You need to be responsible for that. You can't just do it and say, "Oh well, I didn't mean to hurt anybody." That's not going to work. There needs to be ways that people are accountable for the things that they do, and we don't have that now. There is no accountability on the internet. So where there is no accountability, well, that's the Wild West, right? There is no law. It's, people do whatever they want. And the people who can do the most, of course, are the people with power, people with money, people who are able to, put their message out wider and faster than others. So that's kind of the why as far as the big picture goes. But now, the reason it works, the reason that causes all these problems is because of us. We aren't very grown up. We are full of fear. And when everything in our environment is going fear, 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 don't eat this fruit, don't do this, don't do that, and it's, this is going to get you, that's going to get you, people are lying to you, and your whole environment is like that. And what happens is people get more fearful and more fearful. And again, the more fearful you are, the easier it is to get more fearful. So that's why over the past 30 years, the fears has been blossoming in Western culture. I can't speak to other culture. I keep saying Western culture. It's just because I don't know that much about what's going on in Eastern cultures. I've traveled a little bit there, but not enough to actually understand that so much. So I think it's pretty much worldwide. I don't think the West has any monopoly on this dysfunction. I suspect it's everywhere, but I am familiar with the Western culture quite a bit, and that's kind of why I put that caveat in there. It's probably pretty worldwide. Actually, Western culture is pretty much worldwide. The rest of the world is kind of following in that same materialistic, footprint that the Western world generated with its industrial revolutions, kind of spread everywhere. And we've all kind of going through that, now going into the information age. And I guess some of the countries who were the least industrialized now get a double whammy. They get the industrial revolution and the information revolution all at the same time. Yeah. So they get a double whack with that, trying to adjust to that, which is, I'm sure, very difficult. But we're so fearful. We're so, we so are grabbed by our fears. That's the way it is. We're not grabbed. Our attention isn't grabbed by a happy story.
That's true.
We like happy stories. Oh, that's nice. Isn't that sweet? And they they live happily ever after. How nice. But we're not grabbed by it. It doesn't fixate us. Ugliness and dysfunction and fear fixates us. We'll look at that, and over and over and over again. So that's partly because of the way we are. That's a survival instinct. Anything scary gets your attention first. That, of all the things out there to get your attention, scary stuff first, because you don't want to be bitten or poisoned or whatever it is that's creating the fear stuff. You want to protect yourself from that and be aware of it. So when something negative happens out there, everybody's eyeballs are immediately drawn to it. That's, like I say, that's an instinctual thing. That's the way we are. And of course, the people who would like to manipulate us know that's an instinctual thing, and they play to that. They play to that.
Right.
So what are we going to do about it? We, the people here, we, the little people sitting down here at the bottom of the pile, right? What are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to have to grow up and not be so fearful. And one of the ways you do that is to just let let the world be the way it is. Don't take everything so personally. It's not about you. Everything is not about you. And if other people want to jump up and down and get very upset and angry because they've been lied to and the earth really is flat all along, and we've never gone to the moon and none of that has ever happened, and if they want to get really wound up about it, well, let them. You don't have to fight with them. You don't have to get angry with them. Just let them be. Because as soon as you get upset and annoyed by that, you become part of that problem. And that is how it just keeps building and building. You become part of their problem. Then you get angry, and your anger causes other people around you to become part of that problem. And so on it grows. So first thing is just let everybody else be the way they are. And if somebody wants to go out there and they're terrified of daisies and they want to, rip up every daisy, on the ground, well, you don't have to go out with your gun, and shoot them. Find some other solution. Find some other solution. Something that is not anger-based, something that isn't fear-based, something that doesn't want to get even. You see, just deal with things in a positive way. All right, there are people who do things that are dysfunctional, like trying to pull up all the daisies in the world. We like daisies, but you don't have to get angry. You don't have to go by and find that person and smash them. That's not required.
No.
There are other ways to deal with things that are not making yourself part of the problem. So that is the thing. Kind of stop and take, just kind of let it all go. Let all the stuff that you're wound up tight about, whether it's vaccinations or having to wear a mask, or whether it's because your government lied to you about people landing on the moon, or whatever it is that's got you wound up in a tizzy, then just let it go and figure, if that's true, then there's nothing I can do about it. And if there's nothing I can do about it, getting upset and angry just makes everything worse, not better. Now, if I want to fight it, well, go ahead, fight it, but fight it without getting angry. In other words, you can oppose things. So whatever it is that's got your tail twisted, just say, all right, I'm not going to be angry about it. I accept that's the way it is. I can't change it. It's bigger than me. But what I can do is whatever I do have control over, like my own choice. Of course, my vote, but my voice, my writing letters to the editor, my talking to my friends, whatever. I'll do that, but I won't do it with anger. And I won't call those people by ugly names. I won't say, these stupid people, da, 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 da. I'll just deal with it in a positive way, without the anger, without the name calling, without the angst and stress and, all of that. Just do what you have to do, but do it positively. Do it without any kind of negative feeling. You see, now maybe you decide you want to convince all your friends that, daisies are horrible and need to be eradicated, but that's all right. If you do that peaceably, you see, if you just talk to that and say, I think all the daisies need to go. And if other people say, oh, well, that's interesting, why do you think that? Rather than it turning into something violent, that we have to oppose everything, we have to push back. And some of the reason we do that is our culture, I don't know, Canadian culture is probably a little more or a little less this way than U.S. culture, but U.S. culture particularly starts with children at 3 or 4 years old, and we tell these kids all the way through adulthood that the way you solve problems is with force.
Mm.
Everything they see, all the little kid vids, all the things that are made for 5 and 6 year olds, most of them, not all of them, I take that back. Some of them are nice, but a lot of them, it's about force. The way you fix things is by force. Power Rangers, right? That's for what? 8-year-olds? It's all about force. Think of the movies that come out in KidVid. And I remember one was Fern Gully. Well, that was a thing about the environment. Hmm. Well, there was the bad guys with their bulldozers, and the good people with, like all the nice green plants, and it was violence. Everything ends in violence. The pixies are in a war with the fairies, and anyway, that's kind of our theme. Is that violence is the way you solve problems. You have the good guys and the bad guys, and the good guys have to overpower and subdue the bad guys. Well, that's a very poor message to bring it's a poor message to base your culture on. But we tend to have that ethic. So people have this, when they see something they don't like, getting violent about it and pushing back and, using foul language and calling names and accusing others and anger. That just seems like the natural way to go. And it's not. That's very unnatural. So think about, you don't have to act like what your culture tells you to act like. You don't have to be that way. Realize it. If your gut response to things you don't like is to get angry, well, take a look at that and realize that you are a big part of the problem. Because your anger just makes your opponent more resolved to oppose you. If you talk to your opponent in a nice, even voice, and if you're polite to your opponent, that will encourage your opponent to think maybe about what you're saying and to consider you. But if you holler at your opponent, shake your fist at him and call him names, you just make your opponent dig in deeper to their opposing sides. You're not helping anything. You're making everything worse. So I guess the idea is look at what you're doing and how you're interacting with your environment, with other people, and with the world. And first, do no harm. First, try to not be part of the problem. Try to be part of the solution. That is, not fearful, not angry, not upset, not full of anxiety, not stressed. Let all of that go and let people be who they are. You don't have to, you're not in charge of fixing other people. You're only in charge of fixing yourself. So just because this guy wants to pull all the daisies up in your yard, you just tell him, no, thank you. If you have to pull up daisies, pull them up somewhere else. Go find them growing in the woods somewhere and buy that property and then pull up all the daisies you want on your own property. But don't pull up other people's daisies because that's not nice. Other people like them. But you don't have to fight them. You see, then if you do that, pretty soon your culture will start making regulations to back you up. The culture will respond positively. And they'll say, all right, pulling up other people's daisies is not allowed. Don't do that. If you do, somebody will come and get you and make you stop. You see, but now you don't have to be the policeman. You don't have to be the one that goes out and punches the guy out. Now you have a legal thing on your side that says pulling somebody else's daisies is not appropriate. You're messing with other people's property and you're trespassing or you're doing something, and you can get that such that it isn't done. And that will make it so that most people won't do that because they don't want to be thrown in jail. So then the whole society full of daisy pluckers will kind of disappear because the culture no longer supports it. But if you've got this mad, angry, paranoid culture, then that culture does support it. You see, that culture does support all these negative things because it's a negative culture. So what you want to do is be nice, be positive, and eventually we'll have a society that will have laws that will take care of many of the problems we're having right now. And we've always had to do that. Some of the very first, that's what makes a culture. That's what makes a society. That's called civilization. When a bunch of people get together and make rules that say, here's the things we can do and here's the things that aren't allowed. And when civilizations first got started, you had things like you can't steal other people's things. You can't kill other people just because you don't like them. You can't, just go in and take over somebody else's cave or somebody else's house because you like it better than yours. There's things, because if you do those things, you end up with chaos and the civilization disappears. Civilization is created by making rules that help everybody get along best. Until you have rules, you can't have an economy.
Right.
It's rules is what creates the civilization. And the civilization makes those rules based on what's best for everybody. So if the civilization says, well, we've got this terrible disease, and what we need to do to slow it down is wear masks, then they'll make a law that says you need to wear masks. Or if it says you have to wear a motorcycle helmet because otherwise, your brains are going to get busted out in an accident, and the state will have to pay for you. You'll be a vegetable, for the state for the next 20 years because of your brain damage. And that's not good. Not good for you, not good for us. It's a lose-lose for everybody. So you have to wear that motorcycle helmet. You have to put on your seatbelt. You have to, not steal your neighbor's cattle. You have to, and you got all the stuff that makes it a civilization. Rules that we have to live by, And if we want to mutually have a defense against others, then you also have to pay taxes because that costs money. And if you want the system to help protect you from things that you're not really able, like to come up with what's a carcinogen and what's not, well, that's hard for the individual to do. You need some group of people that are paid to do that. Well, then you have to pay taxes, or if you want police or fire or other things, you have to pay your taxes. And the taxes then support those things that the society wants and needs. See, that's the way it works. So when your culture makes a rule you don't like, well, vote against it. Try to talk other people into being against it. If enough people are against it, it'll go away. If enough people are for it, it won't go away. And you might as well just lump it because you're part of that culture. Your only option is to leave the culture, leave that civilization and go someplace where you're allowed to do what you want to do. It's like we say, if you're alone on an island, well, hell, you can do whatever you damn well please, whenever you damn well please, however you damn well please. But as soon as more people show up, you can't. You have to take others into consideration. And that's what makes a civilization. So if we want to be civilized and live in a civilization where we can all kind of get along, then we have laws. We have criminal laws. We have civil laws. We have all these laws that make our civilization. And sometimes laws get old, like not tying your donkey, to the parking meter, things like that, Sometimes you have to change those. And sometimes laws are bad laws and they create more problems than they're good. But that's part of the civilization. All that stuff has to get worked out slowly by people. And if you're a member of that and laws are passed, then you should abide by those laws and work in a very positive way to get them changed. That's what you do. That's what defines a civilization. If every time a law comes up that you don't like, you decide you're going to go shoot somebody or you're going to start a rebellion, that's not civilization. That's something else. Well, that's civilization the way it was like 10,000 years ago. That's not as civilized. So we often have to do things we don't like to do because, I lived in a state in the Southeast. It was in Virginia, and we had things called blue laws. And the blue laws were things that you couldn't, stores had to close on Sunday. You couldn't buy things on Sunday. Those were called blue laws because there was a dominant Christian ethic. And though we're supposed to have separation of church and state, the people who were legislators were all Christians, so they wanted to impose that Christian theology on everybody else, and they did. And for, 200 years in Virginia, and they may still be there, they had blue laws, things you couldn't buy on Sunday, just because it was Sunday, no other reason. And, the whole South was like that, pretty much. So yes, that was unconstitutional, right? Separation, it had all kinds of things wrong with it. But if you happen to live in Virginia like I did, then you just worked around it. Anything you needed that you might need on Sunday, you better buy it by Saturday or do without it. And you lived with it. It's the way it was. You don't get a gun and go march in the street. That just makes it all worse, not better. You just have to say, well, sometimes there's bad laws. Let's elect better people. And if your culture is such that they don't want to change those laws, because all the time I was in Virginia, which was several decades, all the time there were people trying to get rid of those, but they never succeeded. Because there was always that Christian majority that liked those laws because they were Christian, and those were laws that they thought were good. And the fact that it was, forcing other people, to abide by their religious beliefs didn't really bother them because they were more self-centered, just like everybody is. They're self-centered. It was about them, not about other people. But you just have to deal with that and try to cope with it. Eventually, it'll change. Maybe not in your lifetime, but eventually it'll change. But meanwhile, be happy, be positive. Don't be negative and unhappy and miserable and full of, full of fear and full of nastiness, because that's just wrong. It's wrong. That's not constitutional. It isn't wrong. Let's go get our guns and march on the State House. It just makes all those politicians doing that dig their heels in and say, we'll never change it. So be positive, be happy, find the joy in life. Don't focus on what you don't like. Focus on what you do like. I was in Virginia then because that's where I was going to school. And then that's where I worked. And I liked Virginia. It was a beautiful place. Lots of hills and mountains and beautiful scenery and nice weather. And it was lovely. And I enjoyed all that things. And I didn't really think a whole lot about the nonsense that I had, the little hoops I had to jump through in order to be part of that culture. It's just the way it is. You don't have to have everything your way unless you have this great big ego. If you got this great big ego because you have a lot of fear, then you do have to have everything your way. And you just can't put up with any nonsense. In other words, you can't put up with anybody who disagrees with you. And even if they are wrong constitutionally, well, that's the rule where you live. So live with it peacefully, happily, with joy. Change it. Vote for the people who want to change it. And when it doesn't change, say, well, we'll try again next year. You see, that has to be the attitude, this attitude of trying to control everything is an attitude of fear. Fearful people need to control things. Everybody wants to control pretty much everything because everybody's right up to here with fear. And we're up to here with fear because our culture has been drumming fear into us and been trying to frighten us for the last 30 or 40 years, unlike any culture has ever been, frightened before. Because frightening people, scaring people is how you control them.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. So don't let them get to you that way. Be positive in spite of all that scary stuff. Realize when you see these ads that say, oh, something horrible is going to happen to you if you don't read this, well, don't read it. Because it's just somebody trying to manipulate you with fear. If it starts out with a fear, you're just being manipulated. Don't even bother. Just press that aside. And if somebody says, we live on a flat earth, don't get upset. Don't tell them they're stupid. Just say, well, okay, why do you think that? And then you can maybe argue. Yeah. And Well, I did that. Somebody wrote to me, somebody that I thought a lot of. They wrote to me and they said, "Have you ever seen this fight? You ought to look at that. There's got some real facts there." So I said, "Okay, I'll go look." So I went to a couple of their sites and I spent hours at those sites looking. I mean, here I am. I'm a physicist, right? You know how flat Earth hits me. But I spent hours at that site looking at their arguments because I wanted to understand why they thought that. And after hours of being at their sites, looking at all of their arguments, it's just bad physics. They just didn't understand, the way reality works. They had a lot of things just wrong.
Right.
Their science was probably 200 years old. So that's all. All of their little things that proved it were just bad science. Things that could be explained other ways. But if you really want to jump to that conclusion because you know that your government's lying to you, well, then you tend to believe almost anything. So don't be so gullible and don't be so needing to control. Let things be. All right. You had a thing, like you said, in Canada, had all those truckers clogging up the roads and stuff. And I'm sure there were people who were vehement on both sides. Mm-hmm. People who were angry on both sides. Mm-hmm. You see, and they just feed each other. They just feed each other. And it's not helpful. That's not helpful at all. It's just, people do what they have to do. But if what you have to do is be angry and use force, then it's probably wrong. Now, does that mean you should never have a demonstration? No, of course you have your demonstrations. Gandhi and Emerson and who was the other guy? Anyway, the idea of peaceful disobedience, that's a great tool. But that's nonviolent. Right. That's not angry. Those people being disobedient aren't angry, aren't swearing and shaking their fist and stuff. They're just trying to get news coverage about their point. So if that's what you want to do, go do it. That's not a problem. But just make sure it's entirely nonviolent, non-angry, non-hateful. Sure, you can go out and demonstrate. That's part of our rights, is we can get out and demonstrate about anything we want. Fine. Join up. I'm not saying everybody just has to, shrink back and let everything go. Be as active as you want. Just do it in a positive way. Yeah. Just be positive about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what happens is people being positive can't get that many other people to join them.
That's true.
You see? Because the other people really don't care that much about that issue. But they do. So then they go create fear. And then if they can make it a fearful thing, then they get a lot of people to join them. And now they have a movement based in fear. But the problem is that movement based in fear usually makes things worse. Almost always makes things worse. It doesn't make things better. So if you really are strongly, want to change things and you can't get many people to agree with you, well, then the time isn't right yet. Mm. Your culture's not ready to change yet. And you trying to force it to change is going to make it take longer to change. Right. It'll change more quickly if you don't force it. So if you find yourself in that situation, well, the only way I can get support is using fear, it's not time yet. People aren't ready. Go back to, write a book, again, letters to the newspaper, try to get people to see your point, but do it positively. And when it's time, things will happen. Before it's time, nothing's going to happen. And if you try to force it to happen, you'll just make it worse.
That's good. That's good. I think that's what we needed to hear today. I think it was, yeah. I like the theme of positivity is the one that we need to focus on the most. I think that's where we kind of get lost. Everybody, yeah, I get it's very interesting. I mean, it brings up a whole other issue about censorship and that kind of stuff, but we're not ready for that yet either.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, there are a lot of things in our culture that we should change. I mean, me of all people, I'm an oddball. I'm a real, unusual person, and I see lots of things in my culture I'd like to change. But for the most part, my culture's not ready to change those things yet. And, like I would like to change the viewpoint that most of the scientists have when they're so dedicated to their belief in materialism. That's something I see that it's wrong and needs to change, but they're not ready yet, so it won't happen yet. And if you try to push, you make it worse. Right. So, sure, I have lots of things I'd like to change, and I do my best. I put stuff out there, and whatever, but you have to stay positive with it. Right. You can't force your culture to be the way you want it. And if you feel like you need to try to force it because your way, of course, is the best way and the right way, well, that's just your ego. That's just your fear and your ego that you think that you know best and you want to change everybody else. Well, even if you're right, it doesn't matter. It's a civilization. It's got, hundreds of millions of people in it, and it all has to change when it's right. When the time is right, it will change. And when the time isn't right, you're just banging your head against the wall. You might as well not go there. Just keep working on it. So that's the thing. These ideas, I talked about the fact that we have, the information revolution and things like that. Just, I say that to give people the idea that what's going on is much bigger than just us or just our nation or just our culture. It's a much bigger thing that's going on here with this, change of paradigms that we live under. And thinking that you're going to go out and beat it with a stick until it becomes the way you want it to be is just not going to happen. Oh, it'll change. 100 years from now, things will be very, very different than they are now. Things will change, but they have to change in their own way. And I'm convinced that the more you push on them, the slower they change. Because the other side that wants to stay the same pushes back, and they get energized to maintain the status quo. Right. So you want them to be open-minded enough to see it your way, not energize them to be against you. So be happy, have fun, find joy, find peace in your life, and let the stuff go that you can't change. Let it go. Let it go. Work on changing it however you want, but do it peacefully. So that's my message. You said, how can we talk about all these things without actually talking about them? Because we don't want to get into that vax, not vax, all that. We don't want to go there because all that's just symptoms. It's really not. It's really not the problem. It's just the symptoms of the problem.
Right. All right. Well, I love this. You've been listening to News for the Heart. We've been getting the heart of what matters with Tom Campbell, and not sure what we'll call this, but I like it. Positivity
in the big picture.
In times. In the big picture. There you go. There you go.
Whatever.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome, Laurie.